Hi, my name is Erica Thompson. I'm here at the African American Library at the Gregory School. And on behalf of our entire staff and our amazing management team, Danielle Burns-Wilson, who is manager and curator, and of course, Miguel Caesar, who is our assistant manager and lead archivist. Miguel? Okay. We just want to welcome you to the space. I have to say, the response to this event has been overwhelming. It's been fantastic, and we're so glad that you're here, having braved the rain, so that we might share in this very special evening with you. I'd like to start by thanking Keisha Griggs and Bocage Catering for the delicious bites. Keisha's over in the corner. Thank you, Keisha. The beautiful smiling faces that have checked you in or are checking you in are Carmen Wave from HPL Programming, Alex is Mika, and Miss Mika Selly, who's down at the front. Those are our lovely volunteers from the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, and we just want to thank them for their help today. Of course, we thank Dr. Rhea Lawson and the executive leadership team of the Houston Public Library for their continued support of the work that we do together. We have a lot of amazing partnerships here at the Gregory School, but we are especially proud of the partnership that we've created with the Center for Public History. Doctors Debbie Harwell, Monica Perales, and Todd Romero. Say hello, everybody. And a resounding thank you, of course, to Dr. Mark Goldberg, who you'll hear from tonight, who has been a delight to work with, and we look forward to our next collaboration after a little bit of a break. Okay. I just want to take just a few minutes or a few moments to tell you a little bit about the Gregory School. The African American Library at the Gregory School is named such because we are standing in what used to be Gregory Elementary School. And Gregory Elementary was the first school for free Black children in the city of Houston after emancipation. Historic Fourth Ward Freedmen's Town, which, by the way, for the uninitiated, is called Midtown. But we reject that, okay? But Freedmen's Town was the only area of the city where newly emancipated African Americans could purchase land to establish their communities. So soon thereafter, of course, homes, churches, businesses, those things were established. And of course, as education was the pinnacle of freedom and the path to new citizenship, the Gregory Institute began in 1870, and this building that we're in tonight was built in 1926. It served the community as an elementary school until its closure in the 1980s, when it merged with Lincoln and became Gregory Lincoln Educational Center, which is actually around the corner at Taft in West Dallas. So the building sat vacant for about 20 years, and it was purchased by the city, renovated, and repurposed as an archives library dedicated to the preservation, promotion, and celebration of Houston's African American history and culture. As you probably won't have time tonight because we have a packed evening, we do welcome you back, especially those first-timers, to walk through our galleries and extend an open invitation for you to join us for programming and other events at any time. Next to the podium will be will be Dr. Billy Hawkins, the Associate Dean for Student and Faculty Success and a professor in the Department of Health and Human Performance at the University of Houston. Dr. Hawkins received his PhD in Sport and Cultural Studies from the University of Iowa and an MS in Human Performance from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and a BS in Business Administration from Weber International University. He has authored numerous books, including The New Plantation, Black Athletes, College Sports, and Predominantly White NCAA Institutions. He is the co-author of Sport, Race, Activism, and Social Change, The Impact of Dr. Harry Edwards Scholarship and Service. And he also co-authored The Athletic Experience at Historically Black Colleges and Universities, Past, Present, and Persistence. His research interests include the sociology of sport and cultural studies, sport management, and sport for development. Dr. Hawkins' work has been published in several peer-reviewed journals and presented to academic associations in the fields of sports studies, sport history, sports sociology, and African American studies. Please welcome Dr. Billy Hawkins.
Thank you, and good evening. Welcome to the Black, Brown, and Kosher. On behalf of Dr. Antonio Tillis, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, I'm pleased to be a part of today's celebration of food, community, and multiculturalism. The Dean's Office is delighted that renowned chefs Fany Gerson, Pati Jinich, and Michael Twitty have joined us to share not only their culinary expertise, but their passion for food as a marker of identity and a bridge between ethnicities and culture. I am also deeply grateful for Dr. Rhea Lawson, Director of the Houston's Public Library, and Erica Thompson, Community Liaisons for the African American Library at the Gregory School, both of whom have been instrumental in making this event possible. I would also like to thank the sponsors who have generously supported Black, Brown, and Kosher, the UH Jewish Studies Program, the Center for Public History Lecture Series, Humanities Texas, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Gulf Coast Food Project, UH Modern and Classical Languages, the African American Library at the Gregory School, the Houston Public Library, and the City of Houston. Each of these organizations play an integral role in bringing the talents and perspectives of these chefs to the great city of Houston and the University of Houston. Food and cooking are often taken for granted as parts of our daily routine that are purely for sustenance and survival. To view them in this way is to overlook the considerable artistry, passion, and love involved in the preparation of so many of our favorite foods. Just as food fuels our bodies, it also fuels our interpersonal relationships and cultural understanding, and bring us together for conversation and the shared enjoyment of a common experience. Just 1 week ago, Americans observed Thanksgiving holiday, an annual feast that at its best fosters harmony in the face of political strife, racial division, and cultural differences. Judging from my girth, many of you have probably concluded that I do not miss many meals. I grew up in a family and a community where eating was an event. It was more than an activity to satisfy hunger, it was a social gathering. Whether it was after church, during the holidays, or during family reunions, eating was a joyful event filled with laughter, music, and conversation. This evening, we're looking forward to a joyful event and rich dialogue. I leave you with this: when we hear the words Black, Brown, and Kosher, you may think these three chefs have little in common, but their mutual understanding that food forges lasting bonds across cultures has brought them together here today, where they will build upon their legacy of innovation and progress through thoughtful, challenging conversations. It is my pleasure to welcome Chefs Garrison, Jinich, and Twitty. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Goldberg, Director of the Jewish Studies Program at UH. So I have a few words. First I'm going to introduce the chefs, formally introduce the chefs. Then I'm going to introduce the theme of the night, and then I will explain how tonight is going to work. And I will be brief, I promise. But first I want to thank our sponsors again. And of course, thank you all for coming. And especially want to point out that this night has been made possible by Humanities Texas, NEH, and the UH Center for Public History grants. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And finally, I want to thank the African American Library at the Gregory School, a beautiful and important part of the Houston landscape. It's a pleasure to work with Erica Thompson and with the library. And we now have quite a history of putting on fantastic events together, and I will wait before we plan the next one, but we have a bright future too. So let me introduce the chefs, starting with Chef Fany Gerson. As the country's most authoritative voice on Mexican sweets, Fany Gerson has been featured in the New York Times, Gourmet, Fine Cooking, Saveur Magazine, Food and Wine in New York magazines, among others. She launched the acclaimed La Neoyorquina, an artisanal Mexican frozen treats and sweets business in 2010. She's also the chef and co-owner of Dough, an artisan gourmet donut shop in New York, a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, Fany has worked in a range of fine dining kitchens around the world, including 3 Michelin star Aquelarre in Spain and 11 Madison Park in New York. She's written 3 books, My Sweet Mexico, which was nominated for a James Beard Award in 2010 for Best Baking and Pastry Cookbook, and also Paletas and Mexican Ice Cream. Fany opened her first brick and mortar for La Neoyorquina on October 2016 in the West Village of New York City. Next, born and raised in Mexico City, Pati Jinich is the James Beard Award-winning host. Pati Jinich is the James Beard Award-winning host of the PBS television series Pati's Mexican Table, going on its 7th season nationwide. Pati's also resident chef at the Mexican Cultural Institute in Washington, D.C., and author of 2 cookbooks, Pati's Mexican Table, The Secrets of Real Mexican Home Cooking, and Mexican Today, New and Rediscovered Recipes for the Contemporary Kitchen. She's led, participated in, and cooked for multiple nonprofit and government initiatives, including at the White House for President Obama's Cinco de Mayo and Easter celebrations. She's a member of Les Dames d'Escoffier, the International Association of Culinary Professionals, the kitchen cabinet for the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History, and her company has been certified as a women-owned business by the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. Finally, we have Michael Twitty, who's set up upstairs waiting for you all. Michael Twitty is a noted culinary and cultural historian and James Beard Book of the Year Award winner for The Cooking Gene, a journey through African American culinary history in the Old South. He created Afro Culinaria, the first blog devoted to African American historic foodways and their legacies. He's been honored by FirstWeFeast.com as one of the 20 greatest food bloggers of all time, named one of the 50 people who are changing the South by Southern Living magazine, and one of the 5 cheftivists to watch by TakePart.com. He's also a Smith Fellow with the Southern Foodways Alliance, a TED Fellow and speaker, and the first revolutionary in residence at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. So on to the theme of the night. Food, as we've heard already tonight, nourishes body and soul. It also nourishes place, or to quote Michael Twitty's discussion of place in The Cooking Gene, makom, which is the Hebrew word for place. The food we eat, the recipes we cook, the cookbooks we buy, or the ones we make ourselves, the food stories we tell reflect how we see ourselves fitting into our communities, our families, and also life in America. Jewish, African American, and Latino foods are products of many histories. Histories of slavery and persecution, histories of migration and immigration, histories of heritage, preservation, and change. As a result, Jewish, African American, and Latino foods tell stories about one's place in the world. Our city, Houston, is a place where historically members from these 3 communities have met and influenced one another. We're standing in Freedmanstown, where about 1,000 formerly enslaved African Americans settled after the Civil War. Over the next decades, Creoles of color and Southern African Americans migrated to this city, building onto Houston's existing Black community. Houston was also the destination for Jewish immigrants in the 19th century, some of whom built the Beth Israel Cemetery in 1844 on what's now West Dallas, which is not far from here. Over time, the Jewish community grew and evolved, attracting migrants from all over the country and immigrants from all over the world. In some ways, Latino Houstonians were here before the United States, as many Tejanos have been living in the area for generations. In the early 20th century, Mexicans fleeing a revolution integrated into the existing Latino community, and over the next century, Latino migrants and immigrants have grown the community into an international and diverse population. These histories, which I abridged intensely, are imprinted all over Houston's culinary landscape. Houston is a place where diverse cuisines have shaped one another. Dishes that these three chefs make: Fany Gerson's matzo ball soup with cilantro, onion, avocado, and lime, Pati Jinich's gefilte fish a la veracruzana, and Michael Twitty's West African brisket, parallel our city's cultural and culinary past. And food offers a window into this cultural blending, but what we don't always hear are the stories from the people in between. Individuals like Chefs Garrison, Jinich, and Twitty, who have a foot in multiple communities. Their foods teach us about place because they tell us about where the chefs are from, where they are now, and what it means to live in the U.S. as members of various communities. These are the food stories that we will hear tonight and the conversations that we will have. Bringing these chefs together will help us understand our city, our communities, and finally, our place. This event is about these three award-winning chefs, but it's also about us. Talking about food, something meaningful to all communities represented here, will bring out ways that our communities overlap. And while I can't guarantee that you won't leave hungry, and I'm pretty certain you will, maybe you'll also leave with a small stash of new recipes or cooking ideas that you never thought of before, but that also reflect your place. So with that, let me explain to you how tonight is going to work. So each of you has a name tag in a certain color: black, brown, or blue. And there are stations upstairs, black, brown, and blue stations on the second floor. The black station is, if you take the stairs behind me, in the reading room, which will be to your right. The blue and brown stations are upstairs to the left, and all of them are labeled, right? So you'll know where to go. So each chef is by the time you get up there, planted in a station, and they're gonna facilitate a discussion and then rotate every 30 minutes to have this conversation about food and place. So please gather your things, and if you can go behind me, up the stairs, or the elevator to the second floor.
So I've been looking forward to this event for 2 years. Very excited because Fany Gerson, who you will hear from, is also a very dear friend of mine. And we have a very similar story. Michael Twitty, I'm a fan of. You will also hear from him, but I'll share a little bit of my story and where I fit in within this context. And then I think we're supposed to be having a conversation, which is going to be very hard because, as my husband says, don't give Pati a microphone. And so please stop me. Jump in when you have questions. I'll try to just talk for a few minutes and then stop and see if you guys want to jump in. So I grew up in Mexico City, born and raised in Mexico City, feel Mexican, 100% Mexican to the bone, as we say in Mexico, chilanga from Mexico City. But I also grew up as a Jew in Mexico. Mexico is a country that is probably 99% Catholic. Mexico is a fabulous, incredible country that is rich and diverse and that has many complex identity layers and that has had a very complex intermarriage. But the way they've taught Mexicans what Mexico is a very simplistic way. The way they've taught us in Mexico what Mexico is that Mexico is a country intermarried between the New World, which is the native indigenous people that existed in Mexico, the Aztecs, the Totonacas, the Mayas, and the Old World, the Spanish conquerors. And you see all these romantic images of when the Spanish came and the Aztecs welcomed them, and then there's this intermarriage, and I guess there were 300 years of colonial, there were over 300 years of colonial rule And there was the intermarriage, of course, in the kitchens, which is what I focus mostly now, of all the strong pillars of different indigenous cuisines of Mexico and the Spanish European cuisine. But what this picture missed was all of the immigration waves that happened in between. And I guess this has to do with more topics that you guys will study here in the university about how a nation builds its own identity. But the way that they built it in Mexico, it was the idea that Mexico has a cosmic race, which is the intermarriage between Old World, New World, and there's nothing in between, to put it so everybody could understand. It's a cosmic race. It is not Spanish and European. It is not native indigenous Mexican. It's a superior mixed race. So just to make it easy. But it is not so easy, because that picture misses the waves of Africans, 300,000 over 300 years. And now there's this counterculture in history and culture and politics that is called the third root. And it's starting to really realize how rich that third root is. And there is something called Afro-Mexico that was sort of hidden in between the lines. And just like there's Afro-Mexico, there's Asian Mexico. There were huge waves of Filipinos and Japanese and Chinese, and another wave there, the Jews. There's Jewish Mexico, there's Lebanese Mexico. Anyway, just to put it in context, because when I was growing up as a Mexican Jew, I felt like I was treading worlds. I had my grandparents who were all refugees from the Holocaust and from pogroms, some from Poland and some from Austria and Hungary. And we celebrated Shabbat dinners on Friday night and some high holidays. And my grandparents, and especially my grandmothers, one Polish, one Austrian, they were so incredibly grateful to Mexico, because Mexico welcomed them at a time where they couldn't come into the US, and they grew roots. And the way that they found to grow roots in Mexico mostly was by weaving in everything that they brought and that they carried from their heritage and the countries they brought with the new land that became their home. And you could see that in the dishes, like the gefilte fish Veracruzan and the matzo ball soup with lime juice and avocado on top. And I can quote many, many other dishes. But then, so I had that experience, and then my parents decided to not be fully a part of the Jewish community. So me and my sisters didn't go to Jewish school or Jewish organizations or anything Jewish, and I was one out of 2 Jews in a school that had, in my year, 150 people. So I was the only Drijansky, so I stood out. And not in a great way, many times. And so I really wanted to fit in, and I, went to the posadas, and my bobe, who's Polish, came to a play at school and almost died when she found out I was playing Virgin Mary. And and then she almost died again when I did the cross in front of a church, when we were driving in a car. And it's because I was raised by a Oaxaca nana. My mom worked full-time, and I was the 4th daughter. I'm the 4th of 4 girls. And I adore my nana. It's like my mom. And so she would take me to church Sunday, and and I feel very at peace in a church. So I always say I'm a very Catholic Jew. I love churches. So that's the kind of intermarriage, and that's what happens when borders and cultures clash and blend within. So I grew up in Mexico not really knowing there's a beautiful song. I don't know if you guys have ever heard a singer named Jorge Drexler. He's incredible. And he has this song that I can't stop listening that's called the song of the Jewish Moor, La Canción del Moro Judío. And he says, I don't know who's my God, and I don't know where I belong, but I'm a Jew living in a land of Moors. And so anyway, so I grew up feeling that I was sort of treading worlds, not belonging here, not belonging there, loving everything, of course. And then I moved to the US. And then I had 3 boys who are Mexican American. And so now we have a Mexican American family. And you just had to throw in another ball at me. For me to have everything make sense, I switched careers, and I found that it is, I'm simplifying here, but I have truly found that in the kitchen is the one place where all of my identities really make sense. And as I was telling Mark earlier, I feel that being a Jew for me has not been a static experience, has been a very evolving one. And my husband doesn't love it when I say this, but I can't help it. I'm very transparent and honest. I was embarrassed of being a Jew when I was young and I was growing up in Mexico. I wasn't comfortable with my Jewish identity. I loved my grandparents and my family, and I loved the Shabbats and I loved the high holidays. But I was sort of pointed at, and I wanted to be a Gomez or Perez or Lopez and have brown eyes. And I wanted to kneel down on Sunday at church like everybody else. So anyway, of course now I'm 46 years old. I've embraced my Jewish identity beautifully. I'm very proud of who I am, where I come from. I've made sense of my roots and what my family has gone through and what I want to pass on to my kids. And I find that having all these different parts of oneself can only enrich one another. And I really try to find common ground and common denominators. And what I've realized in the US, which has been really fascinating to me, is that every one of us has this mosaic, this beautiful mosaic, you know, and we are all the same with just different, you know, like those games that kids see when you look through the eyes, and what's that called? I don't remember. Yes, we're all these complex kaleidoscopes, and in a way each one of us is a universe, and it's what dish are we, you know, each one of us is so different. So I super oversimplified, but I don't know if, and I'm talking a lot, and this was supposed to be a conversation, so I don't know if anybody wants to share something or ask a question about Jewish Mexico, or about Mexican American Jews, there are many, or about Jewish Mexican cuisine, because I can keep on talking. Yes, please.
I guess I'm curious to know what would you say was the first dish that you cooked when you started cooking that made you feel like this is all of my identities in one? Or maybe not,
yeah.
Maybe more so some than others.
That's a beautiful question. That's a beautiful question. And the question was, what was that dish that I made that made me feel like this is my identity and I'm comfortable with who I am? Yeah? I'll tell you first, what was the first dish that I started cooking and that made me feel like I wanted to jump in the kitchen, and that made me feel like you could make your home wherever you grow roots? When I moved to the US, I thought it was just for a little while, and I'll get to that dish, but I talk a lot. When I moved to the US, I thought it was gonna be just for a little while, you know, 1 or 2 years, and we were gonna go back. I was running away from my mother-in-law, that's the truth. No, my husband and I married, and we decided we wanted to start solo. My husband is my firstborn man, he has 3 sisters, and my mother-in-law adores him. And I wanted to study abroad, but also I knew if I stayed there, we wouldn't last 6 months. So now my mother-in-law and I are really good friends, but it took me 20 years to win her over. So anyway, we moved to the US, and I thought it was just for a little while. And then 2 years went on, we moved to Washington, D.C., and when I first started cooking, when I was homesick and hankering the food from home, and I couldn't go to Mexico because I applying for my papers and you can't go back. So, oh my God, the nostalgia. And you get really romantic about avocados and tomatillos. And I had these dreams about walking into my home kitchen and smelling caldo de pollo, or chicken broth, which is a tradition in any Mexican household and Jewish household. That's how Mexican and Jewish go together, aside from mothers being obsessed with overstuffing and overfeeding their children. But I started having these dreams about making chicken broth, and I would wake up crying and like biting my lip like I wanted to wake up because I was so miserable in my dream. And because I didn't have that smell of chicken broth in the duplex we were renting in Dallas, Texas. And that threw me to the grocery store, and I started connecting with other Mexican immigrants from other places from Mexico that I had never even heard of. And I realized I trained as a political analyst. I was writing a thesis on Mexico's democratic institutions. I felt I knew so much about Mexico, and I realized I really didn't know that much, you know? But anyway, we moved to Washington, D.C. We had our firstborn, then I was pregnant with my second son, and my mom kept waiting for me to go back to Mexico. When she realized that maybe we weren't gonna go back because then our secondborn was born, and then I went back to school, and my husband had a good job he liked, she called me up and she said, well, you know what you've become. And I said, what? And she said, you've become a despatriada. And that is not a nice thing to say. I didn't take it, you know, on the right, it really hurt, but I didn't take it on the bad side because I knew how much she missed me. She just wanted me to come back. But despatriado is a really strong word, especially if you're a Jew. Because Jewish people have a reputation of being, you know, wandering aimlessly, not being accepted in one place or another. And being despatriado means that you don't have roots, that you don't have that you've never had a home, and that you don't have a home to go back to, that you're rootless. And it really hit me, you know, and I really felt like I was floating a little then. 20 years later, and again, I'm making this a very short story, I realized that not only I strengthened my roots to Mexico, they're so strong. I devote my professional life, which is most of my time, in trying to build bridges between Mexico and the rest of the world. And in not only sharing my Mexico, but continuing to explore Mexico. But I've grown really strong roots in this country. I love the US. It's where my kids were born. It's a country that's given me incredible opportunities. That I've worked very hard for. But I tell my mom, you know, I'm not rootless. It's not like I'm not rootless. I have roots in two places. And they're just as strong. And I feel like this is a shared story of me and Mexicans and Latinos and African Americans and lots of other identities, that we have roots in more places than one. And that doesn't make us bad human beings or disloyal. That makes us bridge builders, you know? So if we want to help build bridges, and I tell my kids that they're in a really, really unique space, because being Mexican American or American Jewish or African American or whatever you may be makes you be thankful and grateful to more than one country, to more than one culture, to more than one history, but it also makes you responsible for more than one. So you get double or triple the blessings. And I used to only say, you know, I'm grateful to Mexico and America. And it wasn't until I fully came with my Jewishness that I say, oh, and I'm grateful for 3, thank you, but I'm responsible for 3, you know? Because I have to be a good Mexican abroad. I have to be a good American, I mean good in a good way. And I also have to be a proud Jew and a good Jew, and I have to represent, and I always tell my kids, when you're a minority in whichever way, or when you belong to a group that has been either pushed aside or persecuted or whatever, you're held to a higher standard. You are. You know, when someone Jewish does something really wrong in political administration or in something, it's like, oh, he had to be a Jew. And when you're a Jew, you're like, geez, thanks. You know, and I guess the same thing happens to Latinos and Mexicans and African Americans. So we have to take that, we have to own that. And I never wanted to do Jewish food because I felt like it took away from my Mexicanness. And I was still trying to prove that even though I'm Jewish, I'm just as Mexican, you know? So when I switched careers to cooking and I started teaching classes and doing some radio and I wrote my book, people would wonder about my last name. Hey, are you Jewish? And sometimes I got it good, like, oh, you're Jewish, it's interesting. And sometimes I got it, really, you're Jewish, you know? And so I just didn't want to touch that topic until I was directly asked to teach a class on Mexican Jewish cuisine. And the person that asked me said, because there's no such thing, right? And I was like, just 500 years of Jewish cooking in the making. So it made me start digging and researching on a topic that I realized I didn't want to touch because it hurt. And when I started researching and I started connecting with those stories in my family, I put this whole Jewish Mexican menu together. And the first dish that I made was a gefilte fish that I grew up eating with my Polish grandmother. That's a gefilte fish a la veracruzana, which if you're an Ashkenazi Jew or a Jewish of Eastern European descent, and I'm not that savvy, but you know, in Mexico it's funny because either you're an Ashkenazi Jew or you're an Arab Jew, which I know is very politically incorrect to say. But that's the way we say it in Mexico, but Mexico is overall very politically incorrect. But anyway, so I made these gefilte fish, and that was the first time that I had made something Mexican Jewish outside of Mexico for a Jewish crowd, trying to show that there is such a thing as Jewish Mexico and that we're not weird, that there's Jewish Mexico, there's Asian Mexico, there's African Mexico. So it's helped me to put it in context, and it's helped me not only shine a light on who we Mexicans are, but it's helped me teach Mexicans as well that we're much more diverse than we think, because Mexico can also be very classist and racist in a very different way than America, but I guess we humans are full of flaws everywhere. Yes.
Could you describe what's in your gefilte fish and how
Yes, of course.
it makes it both Jewish?
Yes. So I'll tell you. Gefilte fish a la veracruzana gets its name from Veracruz. Veracruz is a state that's in the open mouth of the Gulf Coast. And that is where most immigrants have come into Mexico. Whereas from Africa, from Europe, from most immigrant waves have come through Veracruz. And in Veracruz, there's a very famous sauce that's called the Veracruzana or a la Veracruz sauce, which marries Spanish ingredients from the conquerors and Mexican ingredients. So it's a very thick tomato-based sauce that is cooked over onions and garlic that have been caramelized. And then it has manzanilla olives, you know, the green olives stuffed with pimientos, capers, and pickled banana chilies. You know, what are they called in English? Pepperoncini, like pepperoncini. It is an incredibly delicious sauce. It's sweet, it's sour, it wants to be spicy, but it's not really spicy. And then in Mexico, gefilte fish is made mostly with red snapper, which is a warm-tasting, flaky, friendly fish, different from the fish that's used to make the Eastern European style gefilte fish, which is carp or hake, which is like cold gray. pretty somber fish, you know? So you get different kinds of fish. And instead of the gefilte fish being served cold with a weird aspect, and it's gray and not very flat. I mean, Ashkenazi food can do a better job at presenting itself, to be honest. It's just not that appealing. In that way, Ashkenazi food has really been blessed by Mexican ingredients and sauces, you know. But so you cook the gefilte fish patties instead of the fish stock, where you cook the fish's head and tail, in this beautiful, warm tomato sauce. So you don't need an acquired taste to like gefilte fish for that. Yes.
First, be careful what you say about that aspect. Some of us love gefilte fish jelly.
I know. Listen, I love it too, but you need an acquired taste, right? Like,
So not very appealing to the safety.
not very pretty. It just tastes like home. Yeah.
If you put 10 Jewish bakers together, you'll get 12 different challahs. And one of the things that my wife and I do when we travel is when we go to a new city, we always, whether it's stateside or in Europe, we always buy a challah. We want to see what the local challah is like. So is there anything distinctive about the challah in Mexico as opposed to anywhere else?
That's a beautiful tradition that you guys have. That's wonderful. Mexico has really good bread. I mean,
But I've never had a challah.
yeah, I mean, Mexico has really good challah. I can tell you, the challah in Mexico is really, really puffy and lightly sweet, and you can find it with cinnamon, you can find it with chocolate chunks. I would say, like thinking about it, in my memories, challah in Mexico used to be a little bit sweeter than here, very, very fluffy. So my grandmother, the Polish one, used to welcome us every Shabbat with the challah, like freshly sliced, and some warm corn tortillas, and she would make egg salad, but she would mash ripe Mexican avocado into the egg salad. And so you got there right after school, and you grab a warm corn tortilla or a slice of challah, and you'd put that guacamole egg salad kind of a thingy, and then she'd have a gigantic bowl with freshly made grivenes. Yeah, to die for. You know, you don't miss chicharrones if you have homemade grivenes.
You're killing me.
Yeah, I know, it was crazy good, it was crazy good. And then she used to, for the gefilte fish question, let me know, because I know I talk a lot. You let me know when I need to switch. So my grandmother, she used to make 2 kinds of gefilte fish every Friday night. You know, my Polish grandparents were very, very simple, humble people. They just didn't have a lot of money at all. And they would just put everything they had on Friday Shabbat. And she would make so generous. She would make the white gefilte fish, because some people just wanted the white, and then she would make the red gefilte fish. And when you came there, everybody had a nickname, right? So I'm Pati, I was Patele. So, Patele, which gefilte fish do you want? Do you want red or white? And I would say, I'll choose in a second, you know, so I would go and I would always choose the red. So I'd get the red gefilte fish and some pickles that they made in a piece of challah, and I also added crane on top. And when I was in the middle of eating it, she would come by and say, so you don't like my white anymore, Patele? Like every Friday would be the same thing. Or I would say, okay, I'm just gonna choose a white one. And if I chose a white one, it was, oh, you don't like my red anymore. I miss her very much. Yes.
So you talked about growing up and feeling like an outsider as, you know, one of 2 Jews in a school of 150. Has your experience been that as an immigrant to the United States from Mexico, do other immigrants from Mexico in the United States now accept you as more Mexican? Does the minority status within the minority go away?
That is a great question. Nobody had ever asked me that question. It's a great question. First of all, when I moved to the US, I moved to Texas, to Dallas. In Dallas, I don't know much about Houston, but in Dallas, either you hang out with the Americans or you hang out with the Mexicans, but there's not that much crossing between. And we were living very, like the Mexicans that we knew just hung out with Mexicans. They spoke in Spanish. They did the same thing every weekend, grill out, the same quesadillas, same carne asada, same friends every weekend. And my husband and I, we didn't know how long we were gonna be in the US. We wanted to meet people, we wanted to meet Americans, right? Like if we were in the US, we wanted to meet Americans. People could not put Mexican and Jewish together. They had a really hard time. So the same thing happened to me when I when I switched from political analysis to cooking. The very first national TV appearance that I did, I was a guest on Paula Dean's show, The Best Dishes with Paula Dean, when she still hadn't fallen from where she fell. I was very excited. I had no media training, and I walk in the set, and they tell me, Pati, don't be nervous. The cameras are going to start, unscripted. Paula loves Mexican food. She doesn't like it spicy. Whatever you do, just do something, okay? Just don't just stare at the camera, and whatever you do, just find something to chop. So I said, okay. So we start. She comes in like 3 seconds before they start with the cameras, and she's like, Mexican, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, you don't look Mexican. And I'm like, I swear. I hablo español, you know? I swear I'm Mexican. So they start, and she's like, oh, she's Mexican. And what's your last name? And I'm like, Jinich, darn. She's like, are you a Jew? I'm like, okay, I'm really starting from underground here. You know, I thought I have a long way to hike. She ended up being adorable. You know, like by the end of the show, she was slapping my butt. She was eating from my tacos. She was like, but it's just the perception, you know? If you're a Mexican, why are you white? And that's always pushed the button, because for all the time that I was in Dallas, I would get the same questions time and again. Where's that accent from? And I would always play, and I would say yes. And they would say French, Polish, Russian. Like, they got to Mexican, never. And when I got to Mexican, they'd be so disappointed. They'd be like, oh, you know? And I'm the fourth child. We aim to please. We don't like to disappoint. So it was very disappointing to disappoint all the time, you know? So I feel like we got that, you know, from the non-Spanish speaking community. And with Mexicans, I feel like it was more open and it was more welcoming, because the funny thing is, when you're a Mexican abroad, Mexico is much richer and much diverse than we Mexicans know. We don't travel so much. Mexico is not like a country in the US where people relocate all the time. In Mexico, there's one big metropolis, and that's Mexico City. You die where you're born. You know, people just don't move that much. So Mexicans don't know each other that much. Like, people from Yucatan maybe have never met norteños. Norteños maybe haven't met people from Chiapas. It's really fascinating. And in the US, you meet all these Mexicans, and so people learn to be much more open. 2 minutes. But so, in a way, I think it was more open, because you meet different Mexicans, so you realize you have just as much preconceptions as other Mexicans. On the Jewish side, I did have a few experiences, especially in the cooking world, where, to give you an example, and I've never told this story, but when we were invited to come cook at for this Mexican Jewish event, which was the very first time that I planned a Mexican Jewish, I did so much research. I interviewed all my family. I read a lot about the history of Jews in Mexico, and it was at the Lubavitches in Washington, at the Lubavitch house, okay? I'm not kosher. It was difficult. We had to cook there for like 4 days, you know, when you're not kosher and you don't know, it's just hard to you're not used to it. And my whole team wasn't Jewish. And when we first got to the Lubavitch house and we had to be there more days than the usual because of the kosher rules, when my team, and I've known them for years, like one of them looked at the mezuzah and said, "Oh no, Pati, they're Jewish, they're gonna be very difficult." And I had known them for years and worked with them for years. They're like family to me because we work so much together. And I felt that ping of embarrassment that, oh, it's good they don't know I'm a Jew. And then I was like, hey, I am a Jew. This is a Mexican Jewish class. And I looked at him and he's a great friend. And I said, did you know I'm a Jew? And I said, but I'm a good one. And because I do know some Jewish people that have those characteristics, of that people criticize, just like you find any other people from any other groups that give the different groups the reputation that they unfortunately have. And it is when you meet people like that you think, oh, don't do that because it harms us all, But so I guess it evens out. But I have felt in the US much more comfortable within my complex identities because I've met so many people that have so many complex identities in such beautiful ways. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. So I know there were introductions, but I'm gonna briefly introduce myself, and I want to just tell you a little bit about me and what I've done, and I really hope this this strikes up, a conversation with all of us, and I would love to hear some of your anecdotes. I don't want to just hear myself talk, but if you have any questions or you can't understand, sometimes I'm thinking in Spanish, and my thoughts don't go as smoothly. So just interrupt me, let me know. So I was born and raised in Mexico City. And I grew up in a house that was, I would say, culturally Jewish, but not religious. My mother converted into Judaism, and I didn't go to a Jewish school. So in Mexico, the Jewish community is very, if you grew up in the Jewish community, you're gonna say it's very close-knit in a positive way. If you are Jewish, in our case, that we were not part of that, we were gonna say we felt it was very sort of exclusive, like an exclusive club that we were not welcome. So it was we went to an international school, and my parents debated whether to send us to a Jewish school, and for many reasons they ended up not sending us, but it was important to my father to send us to, to have that as part of our upbringing, right? So he sent us to different youth groups, to my sister and I. She's almost 3 years younger than I am. And I've always been the kind of person, even when I was little, that I can be thrown anywhere and I'll talk with the wall, I would take all kinds of classes, whether it was arts, poetry, sports, anything. But I have to say that when we did these youth groups, we tried different ones. It was kind of disastrous. It was very difficult for us, and we didn't know how to talk about it with my father, because we knew it was something that he yearned for. He wanted us to have that connection with that community, and we just felt rejected. My sister was very bullied. She had, when we were younger, like her nose was a little bit wide, and so they started calling her marrano, and then there was this whole, which means pig, and then there was this whole, well, you're not really Jewish because your mother wasn't born Jewish, and so there was like a lot of things that we didn't know how to talk about with my father or our family, and so that was very difficult. And eventually, after several years, I said, Dad, we just can't. I'm sorry, we can't go to these youth groups anymore because we tried, but it's and my sister was crying all the time, and I said it wasn't good, right? On the other hand, we would go to my grandmother's house, my grandparents' house from my mother's side, and it was a very welcoming place in that sense. But we would go there to put like the Christmas tree with the nativity scene, and for us, we didn't understand sort of like that it was different, right? Like we didn't know. We were just there like, oh, this is fun, we're putting the nativity scene. But there, because it was a different social economical background. So when we were there, my parents would say, make sure you don't tell them that you went here and that you traveled there, or that you're taking this class here or you're taking it there. So for my sister and I, it was kind of confusing, to be honest, because on the one hand, we would go to my grandmother's house, the Jewish house, and it was a very welcoming place. But then we had those experiences with the youth groups, and then we would go to my grandmother's house for my mother's side of the family, and we felt we couldn't be ourselves. Like why are we're hiding? So my sister and I would play a lot together, needless to say, and then when I graduated high school, I told my parents I wanted to go to Israel. I felt I yearned and I was missing this Jewishness part of my life, and so I wanted to go there. So I went, and there I ended up meeting some of my closest friends to this day. And I shared like a flat with 3 girls, well more, but it was like 8, but 3 Mexican girls. One of them also, they were all Jewish, but one of them, just like me, didn't go to a Jewish school. And actually, it turned out that her mother and my father worked at the university teaching in the same department. So we had a lot of parallels. And the other 2 friends grew up in the Jewish community, in this part that, and she and my friend Daphne, who was the one that had a similar upbringing, had a similar thing happen to her. And so then we would have these conversations, and it was very surreal, because for them, for the 2 that went to the Jewish schools, they had never had any friends that were not Jewish. They had never had any interaction of anybody close their age that weren't Jewish. And my other friend and I would look at each other, and we could not understand. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean you haven't? Because that's where they grew up, all their friends, where they would play, where they would classes they would take, the camps they would go to, the friends of the parents. I mean, at no point in time. So for them, going to Israel was like opening up this world to them, to wow, all of these possibilities. And for us, it was kind of the opposite. We're like, oh, no, like it's not like this. I went to an international school where there were people from all over the world that were very close to each other. Anyway, so years later, I moved to New York, and it was one of the Jewish holidays. And I realized I didn't have anywhere to go because I didn't know anybody. I didn't have family there. I hadn't met friends there. And so I said, well, I'm gonna make it. But then I realized I don't know how to make any of these things. I did not grow up in a house where I had a mother or a grandmother or anybody who taught me how to make these things, who taught me how to make challah bread, or I grew up eating them. I would go to my grandmother's house or my parents' friend's house, but it hadn't dawned on me. So I started reading about it. I started reading about different cookbooks, and I called my grandmother, who had a cook that her name was Marta, and I said, Anna, can you please give me the recipes of these dishes. Oh, I don't make them anymore. Ask Marta. So in Mexico, we have these two kinds of gefilte fish. We have the white and the red, which, by the way, it took me years to know that this wasn't the case everywhere in the world. I thought that was everybody, right? So you had the white, which is the traditional cold one, and then you have the warm gefilte fish, which was my favorite, with a tomato-based sauce, and it was kind of spicy and a little bit sweet and sour. And so I had this notebook and I started writing down, and then she would say, oh, no, call me back later because I have to, I don't know, do something. So I'd call her back later and I would start the recipe all over again. And to make a long story short, I had like 10 versions of the recipe, which with completely different quantities. And I thought, is she hiding the recipe for me, And yes, she was. She was hiding the recipe from me. And so in Mexico, people are very protective, we say jealous of their recipes. I think I've spent a lot of years doing research, and I think that this is one theory. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think that it's a third world country, so people don't have a lot of stuff. They don't, but this is something that they have and they hold dear to their hearts, and they don't, it's for the most part oral traditions that they pass to generations. And I have met people that if they don't have somebody to pass it on to, they'd rather go with it, like literally be buried with their recipes than to share. So I thought, Marta is not giving me the recipes and they're not even her own, but she had made them her own. So then I started making my own. And so my great-grandmother, Babi, died when I was very young, but I always had a very close relationship with her. And I feel like even though I only knew her for a few years, I feel like I've known her my whole life. I don't know if that's ever happened to you guys. So when I started making them, I didn't have anybody again to like show me. And I had gone sometimes to see, but every time I would go, my grandmother would be like, no, just don't stay out of the kitchen and whatever. And of course, that's where I wanted to be. So I always imagined her whisper, like literally whisper to my ear, like, no, do it this way, do it that way. It's maybe it's like a figment of the imagination, but I literally feel like she's whispering, after a few years, it was like, no, you don't use oil for the matzevos. You gotta use the schmaltz and use the, one time it was bone marrow, and so all of these things. So through time, I started to develop my own recipes, right? My own traditions. And I realized years later that part of my identity, my Jewish identity that I thought I was missing, that I went to look for in Israel, I realized that I had it there all along. It just wasn't in the same shape or way that I would see from the outside. And I realized that it's a very intimate definition, right? It's a relationship that you have. I am not religious at all, but I feel extremely culturally Jewish. And then I started to realize there's a lot of parallels with Mexican cuisine and Mexican culture. They're both family-oriented. There's a lot of symbolism around the food. So in Mexico, we celebrate Day of the Dead. And we have pan de muerto, these very ceremonious breads that have certain shapes, that have certain meanings. In Jewish food as well. When you have Jewish New Year, you shape the bread in a different way for the same reason, right? Its own, not the same reason as the Day of the Dead, but you know what I mean, right? Okay. So I started to realize there's all of these parallels, and being away from Mexico is what brought me closer to it. And then I started to say, well, if I don't have these traditions, I kept asking for the recipes, but I started making my own. And then I started being the home for other people that didn't have a home. Now, New York is a very transient city where people come and go all the time. So I've been there for 20 years now. And the first 10, I would say, we would make really good friends and they would come and go. And that was really difficult, but I stayed. So my home became, the home where people, whether they were Jewish or they weren't, but to share part of my culture. And then when I was thinking about the gefilte fish, for example, I thought, actually, even though I love it, I'm not gonna make it that way. Because, I had kind of an idea, but she makes it with canned tomatoes. And I said, as a chef, I can't make it with canned tomatoes, So I started to, think about the way we make salsa in Mexico, these flavors that I longed for, the charred tomatoes with the charred onion and the chilies and everything. And I started sort of playing along, and each year, it's sort of like tweaking here, tweaking this, tweaking that, until I started to become what I think is going to be sort of like a first generation of traditions. And then I taught my brother how to make matzo ball soup. And then, he shared the recipe with my sister. So in a way, even though we all grew up with it, being far away is sort of because none of us live in Mexico now, is what created these new cultural blends, And so to me, that's been a really interesting part of development, both as a chef and personally. And then I started to think, my grandmother makes this matzo ball soup. And when I first moved to New York, let me explain this matzo ball soup. So, so she serves it in a very shallow dish, and they're very small, round balls, and they're very hard. When my father-in-law went there for the first time a couple of years ago, he couldn't cut it. It was really hard. And he looked at my now husband and was like, he didn't know what to do. Because you could literally cut it with a fork and a knife, it's not fluffy. And, and if you're not careful, it can go flying. And it almost did. So when I moved to New York and I went to a deli and I saw they had matzo ball soup, I got this broth with these humongous fluffy balls. And I was like, these are terrible. They don't know what they're doing. Then I went to another deli, the same thing. Another one, the same thing. Then I started to think, well, maybe it's a New York thing. Maybe it's, they were so far, from what my grandmother's matzo ball soup is. But to me, I love my grandmother's matzo ball soup, right? Like that's what I grew up with. But when I started making my own, I started appreciating also the ones I found in New York. I was fascinated by how can this same recipe be so different? This big fluffy and this little, and then I thought, maybe make them, bigger. And no, it was like just a hard rock. So after many years, after a lot of trial and error, I finally came up with my own recipe of the best blend of the two. So it's a fluffy ball that's not too big, it's not too small, and it has a hard center, but the broth that I make is the same way that we make broth for Mexican chicken soup. It's extremely flavorful. It has a little bit of chili in it. It has cilantro. It has like these deep flavors that I yearn for. And I put herbs in the matzo ball itself. But the best part of all is really the garnish. Because in Mexico, you guys all live here, right? So you know a lot about Mexican food, right? You have a lot of really good restaurants here. So everybody likes to make their own, when you eat tacos in Mexico, most of the time they give you the tortilla and the meat, and then you make your own because everybody has their own, their own chef version, their own things. Maybe a little more cilantro, maybe a little less, maybe a mixture of these two salsas make the best salsa. So in that same idea, is that's how I came up with, I was like, well, why don't I just put the same garnish that we have in chicken soup in the matzo soup? So we put avocado, white onion, cilantro, chile, and lime, and then everybody makes their own. So in that same way, I have come up with different recipes over the years that have now become their own, sort of their own thing. And I feel like sometimes a lot of people get very hung up on the idea of like authentic. Is this authentic? Is it not authentic? But is it, like, so is this real Mexican? Is this real? So I want to ask you, tell me, like, is there a dish that you feel you find in every Mexican restaurant? Anybody? Enchiladas. Okay. That's the same thing that the other group said. So enchiladas, right? So enchiladas, very quintessential Mexican, very authentic, right? So the most enchiladas have cheese or cream or both, but that didn't exist before the Spaniards came to Mexico. So is it authentic then? Because it's not from pre-Hispanic times. It also, most of the time, they have chicken. There was no chicken. There were no chickens before they came. So again, is it authentic? Is it not? So I think sometimes people get very hung up on the words. But even if you go to the South, if you go to New Orleans here, and you have gumbo, and you have families that have been making it for decades, maybe one family's gumbo is going to be completely different than the one next door. So which one is more authentic and which one is less? It's what's authentic to you, right? Like, to me, that's what it means. And I don't think people get very, again, sort of hung up on the technicality of it. Like, now I know for my son, having matzo soup with the avocado and lime is going to be authentic to him, So is it better? Is it worse? It's not. I don't feel it's about that. Pati and I were talking about the sort of title of the event. I think, what is it called? Is it black, brown, and kosher? So we were like, well, we're none of those things. We're not kosher, we're not black, and we're not brown. And growing up in Mexico, I wasn't part of one or the other. I was sort of my own, we were our own little world. And it wasn't until, I think that's why I've always felt at home in New York, because it's not about labels, everybody's their own, themselves, and you have a chance to really explore what that means to you. So I think it's the things that maybe were very difficult that we didn't talk about, that my sister and I, as being part of that community, we realized we create our own community, and we did have a community. It just wasn't the community that perhaps we wanted to be part of, or that existed. It was our own community that we formed ourselves. We say living away from our family, we have our friends become your family, your chosen family. So in that same way, it's your traditions, right? You start making traditions, and how many traditions revolve around food? So many, right? About not just the food itself, but the preparation, the rituality of it. And so I think that's fascinating. So I'd love to hear if anybody wants to share like a story or an anecdote of something that you guys make at home that like every year, or that takes you back somewhere, or that you want to pass on to someone. 5 minutes, okay. That was fast. Does anybody want to share?
I'm just curious. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
College saved my life.
Wow.
We had a tragedy in our family 16 years ago. Our eldest son passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And the day after the funeral, I told my wife, I got to run to the grocery store. And of course, she thought I was totally insane. And she said, "Why are you going?" I said, "I have to make challah." And for the next month, and I had made challah, you know, I mean, almost every week for years. But it was the physicality of kneading that challah and having the challah in the house, having the house smelling the way that it did. When people came to, you know, to help us out, it was a magical thing for me. And
Wow.
you know, it helped get me through that time. It was, I love challah.
Yes. That's a beautiful story, and it's so true. Like when you are cooking, when you are, you know, you're able to put everything into it, in the physicality of it. That is so true, and I think that's important to pay attention to that. So thank you for sharing that. You had a question.
One of the things that Al shared earlier was that he goes, wherever he goes in the world, he buys challah just to see the differences.
Oh, wow.
So do you also make challah?
I do make challah. I do make challah bread, and now that I have a son, I'm more inspired to make it as a ritual, you know, like, and I'm excited about the idea of like showing him how to knead and showing him how to do it. And we make, I love bread baking. I love bread baking, and I make the one challah that I've made through the years since my first year, and I've modified it every time, but now I feel like I finally, you know, reached what I wanted. Although I know I keep modifying it. But I make a roasted apple with canela, challah, for the Jewish holidays. And I look forward to it. And I love sort of the idea that food is meant for very specific occasions. You know, like when you make the challah for the holidays or for Sabbath, when you make, again, when we're talking about the Day of the Dead bread for that celebration, I think that, you know, when you start to see it all the time and when you enjoy it all the time, it sort of takes the specialness away. So I think that the ritual that comes with that is really great. And I have a friend, actually, one of my friends from Israel that I met, she has a sister called Yael, and my sister's called Yael, and she had this idea of this, it's sitting in the back burner, and I think it's great. But she said, what if we open a place that does in the same way that I have the donut shop, but with challah, just challah breads, right? You can make so many different ones, so savory and sweet, and there's some places that do that, but in the same, and I said, yes, and we should call it Yaeli's Bakery. You know, because both of her sisters, she doesn't like the name for some reason, but, you know, but I would love to do that. I don't really have the time, but I would love to. And so, there you go. We're going to have to, you got to come make the challah with us. Do you have a favorite challah that you found?
Probably, aside from mine, of course. I think the best one we've ever had was from a little bakery in Prague. That was just...
I need to get that detail from you.
Just incredible.
So what makes yours, what is it? Tell us about your challah.
Cinnamon, vanilla, and it's on the sweet side. And it's very, very dense.
Nice. Yeah.
Small, hard matzo balls. My Bobby also made them.
Yeah?
I never connected or thought about it as especially Mexican.
No, I don't think that it's especially Mexican. I don't, but maybe it was from a specific part of. Where was your grandmother? Where's your Bobby from? Oh yeah? Oh, there you go. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know, but I have to say that I have tried to replicate the hard matzo balls, and I haven't been able to. So, yeah, that's so interesting.
What part of New York are you in?
I'm in Manhattan. I live in the Upper West Side, and then my shop is in the West Village, and then my ice cream shop, and then the donut shop is in the Flatiron. Oh, we have to wrap up, right? But I didn't know we weren't supposed to bring food, but I made something for you guys. I made some, so I make a Mexican-inspired rubelach, and I made one of my favorite flavors. It's a cherry chipotle. It's a dry cherry chipotle. So I'm gonna pass it around, but you didn't. I didn't bring anything.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Here you go. If you can. Thank you. Okay. You're welcome. It's just a little spicy, not too much. Okay. Okay. You're welcome.
Do you think the cars in Mexico and the multiples could be because of the altitude?
Maybe. It could be. But have also had since then fluffy matzo balls in Mexico. So, but maybe they can get harder with the altitude. I don't know. I need to have them in Colorado too. I think it's a preference. I don't know.
The first matzo balls I made didn't puff up at all, and they were like hard marbles. I don't know what I did wrong, but when I just threw them into the garbage disposal, and it sounded like iron,
golf balls.
Well, yeah, exactly. It sounded like golf balls, or I thought it sounded like I had put screws or something metal into it. It just sounded terrible, and I had to pull them out because I was afraid I was going to break them. They were so hard. So I don't know what I did wrong.
I don't know, but it's I've made many variations of the matzo ball itself. This is a matzo ball soup over the years. Like I've done it with different kinds of fat. For me, the one I found I like the most is dog fat, actually, because with the chicken, with the schmaltz, it's too. You can taste it too much, but they do have nice consistency. I did with the bone marrow once, and that was delicious, but really rich. And so if you like bone marrow, it's great, but not if you're gonna have a big meal afterwards, which usually is the case. But I think putting the herbs inside the matzo balls also really makes a difference, because it's like you're cutting through the richness of it. And
about 8 years ago, my son was a chef here in town, introduced matzo ball pho to the world.
somebody was telling me about that. We need to go try it. What's your?
It's since
Yes.
closed.
Okay.
But,
This is that's
he served it for 3 years.
Did you like it?
Oh, it was fabulous.
Do you make it? Have you made it?
No. That's his.
Yours is the
I'll stick
jala. Oh, I need to go. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. How are you? So, this has been a very freewheeling evening, and I don't even know how to approach this, because I've really tried to create dialogue in each group, because I feel a little self-conscious about, 140 charactering myself in 30 minutes, and I also don't want to monopolize all the time. To that end, I would like to know, now that you've done this twice, what you have gotten out of this evening and why you are here. And this should only take about 2 or 3 minutes of our time, and then we can launch into something new. So who shall be first? Oh Lord, it's like teaching Hebrew school all over again. Anybody? Yes, thank you.
Honestly, one thing that and David.
Hi, David. Thank you.
One thing, many individually, but one salient thing for me was what Fany just said about how we get caught up on this idea of authentic. Kind of a myth.
Yes.
And I think that just through my own studies in liturgy and history and Bible, and that's true in every field.
Oh, you're one of those. I see.
A friend of Josh Fixler, too.
Yes, I hear exactly, right? Yeah, that's cool. Rabbi Fixler here in Houston and I taught Hebrew school together, so he knows why I have these gray hairs on my head. That's a big point, and I think for me, if I could get across one or two major ideas this evening for you, is that one of the hardest things I experience as a culinarian is that they have to kind of battle a lot of expectations. First expectation is this. When we look at people who create food or work in food culture, what's the first thing out of our mouths? Do you have a restaurant? Oh God, no, I don't have a restaurant. Don't want a restaurant. If I had a restaurant, I wouldn't be talking to y'all. I'd be too busy running a restaurant. You know, people don't understand that a restaurant is not, you have some amazing culinary ability and creative ideas, and you know, you just have a magic wand and bim bam boom. People love your food, they give you money, you're rich and successful. That's not how it works. You know, Eduardo Jordan, my fellow most decorated African American James Beard Award winner this year, well, us two brothers are holding it down. He works at his restaurant. He may travel, he may take a few pretty pictures, but bruh man is in his restaurant 6 days out of 7 a week. And that's the reason why June Baby is open in Seattle and Solare, because he's there working. That's not my scene. I am a food historian. I am a living history personality. That means I interpret historic sites, teaching people about the history and legacy of African Americans in our kitchens, from slavery to freedom, from Africa to America. And I do that, you know, by cooking 18th and 19th century food and showing people the vast skill set that those cooks and those chefs had, and they're teaching them that the food was a form of resistance against slavery. It was a form of pride for them. It was a form of maintaining their connection to their various African roots, and it was also a means of enslaving the very will of the people who enslaved them. An extraordinary achievement. Because when we teach this history, we don't ever imagine that it seems quite impossible that these folks who were exiled from their homes, sent to these labor camps in the New World, kidnapped from their very existence, would then take their culture and transform the culture of the people who enslaved them to such a degree that it cannot be said that they themselves did not enslave the culture of the enslaver. And if you doubt me, what is America's music? Jazz, rock, hip hop, all of them and beyond. Or Brazil's music, samba, or Cuba, salsa merengue. You remember that song La Bamba? Afro-Mexican folk song. You can't get away from us. We gonna be there, snap, crackle, pop. Every direction. The food, the religion, your favorite preacher, Mr. Joel Osteen, ain't a white preacher on TV, don't preach black. Tell you, we everywhere, we all up in it. And the dances. You know, what was that line from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Sidney Poitier said, "You dance the Watusi, but we are the Watusi." Damn, he was, you know, my mother made me watch every Sidney Poitier movie. It was like part of my manhood training, right? But that's a big part of it. It's such a big part of it. That's why I celebrate that identity through food. I also happen to be a Jewish and gay man. Nobody's heads have blown apart yet, so that's awesome. When I was marketing my book, I gotta tell you, the moment of just like, I can't take this no more, was when a very major publisher, who's really sad now, said to me that America was not ready for me. And I had to process that, because it was with a little lilt of nervous laughter, and I'm just like, hold up, baby. But my America was here before your America was here. Let's get that straight, first of all. Second of all, you're not the gatekeeper of what is American and what is not. And third of all, if I'm not possible here, where the hell am I possible? Just name for me another place. So it was a real issue of confrontation, and they actually asked my agent if I could not wear a kippah in public because it would muddy the waters. I'm like, muddy what waters? We are muddy waters. That's the blues, baby. Shit. Who you telling? But it's the first time in 20 years of being Jewish that I felt I no longer have to make people comfortable with trying to wrap their heads around why I exist. And I thought about this. Your identity is like a toolbox, right? I mean, I had the I don't know if it's bravery, I guess it's, or craziness. I came out in my high school newspaper when I was 16 years old. I'm now almost 42 years old. And I had to look at myself and go, if you were brave enough to do that, why do you keep taking people's shit about being Jewish and being black? Just tell them, no, you own that. I love magazines, baby, but I don't like issues. Take your subscription to your issues right on back. Keep them. Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Gourmet, just take your issues and just archive them all you need to. Because I understand that intersectionality and multiculturalism scares people, but those are not nasty or bad words. That's what being an American is all about. We ain't been the same, nobody on the face of planet Earth since 1500. Don't even realize it, do we? Even them folks on the little islands in India, don't mess with them, because they are no joke. Somebody should have told a little boy, don't go there. But I mean, even think about it. They're unaware because of, thank God, they have their own lives. But they're unaware of the fact that even the fish they're eating have been affected by mercury and nuclear stuff. Nobody on this planet is not affected by everybody else. We're interdependent as a human species. And my job is not to tell you about the practicality of food, how to create a dish. I can show you how to cook the food I cook. You ain't gonna make it as good as me, but you can try. You know, I come from grandmama and them cooking. It's really funny because the first group, I had to explain to like 12 people what grandmama and them. See, right? And they were just like, you know what's funny? I saw your face, your face, your face, your face all go, well, that's grandmama and them. See, like, we knew what that means. And it was just like, you know, I can do that. I'm also not a food as lifestyle person. Pati does that better than me. She got a beautiful kitchen. She got the hookup. She's my neighbor. I should hang out with her more. Pati Jinich. And I'm just like, wow. But that's not me. I am dealing with difficult issues about who we are. And I brought up the book because my next book is Kosher Soul. And it talks about being black and Jewish and food as a means of creating identity, as a means of working through one's identity, as also a means of mixing parts of your identity in the kitchen. And the narrative after that will be about being gay in the kitchen. Because I felt like when someone tells you you don't exist, you don't matter, your story is not important, when you deal with history, you know what happens to those people, right? They become erased. They become nothingness. They lose their anchor in the human story, and we all know how easy it is for everyday people to lose just that. Most of us in this room only have so many names of our ancestors because women didn't count. Their names, their identities, their stories. So half of our family trees are just pop up when they marry some man. And the other part are people who didn't matter until they had a vote or controlled their own destiny or were their own property. And it's so infuriating to think about. Because we know in our own lives, when we look at some but not all, but some of our family and the achievements they made in their lifetime and our lifetime, the things that they did, that make us proud, that make us feel like we come from something, we have a destiny, like we have a responsibility. Imagine multiplying that by every generation that came before them. That's why I do this. I talk about food and our social and cultural politics and identity issues and all of that, not because I want to make food part of a system of discord. No, there's no discord in owning my own story. There is discord when somebody like me, I remember when Tiger Woods won the Masters, and there was that unfortunate comment made, you remember it. What's he gonna serve? Collard greens, fried chicken, or whatever the hell they eat? And I'm like, wait a minute, bro, man. You a white man from the South, you never ate them things too? because the black woman who took care of you never made them things for you? Because she was your real mama anyway? Stop.